Welcome to Ability Assistance. My name is Phyllis Jones, Chair of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
And my name is Stacey Leibowitz, Secretary of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
Today is our long-awaited 50th episode of Ability Assistance, and I cannot think of a finer way to celebrate than having our annual February guest on, State Senator Bruce Tarr, and of course MaryAnn, Senior District Director for Senator Bruce Tarr. Senator MaryAnn, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here and great to think about 50 episodes
of
Ability Assistance.
Yeah.
And you know, what struck me as we were watching all of the people that have been involved in the show over the years is just how much these issues affect all of us.
Yes.
And the guests that you have had touched on so many different aspects of our lives. And it was fantastic. And you know, Ability Assistance has become a great tradition. And we're happy to be the February tradition of Ability Assistance.
And we always love having you.
Yeah.
We always do, because we love these updates from Beacon Hill, because there's so much going on, both nationally and state, and to be able to keep our pulse, you know, our finger on that pulse of what's going on, what's changing, the good things that are coming out of Beacon Hill, so that people can be aware of them, because knowledge is power.
Well, no doubt about it, and I think that's one of the values of community access television to begin with, is to be able to share that information about what's going on in the community. But in a more broad sense, it's great to be able to share that information about what's happening on Beacon Hill and elsewhere, because when people understand and know what's happening, they can become more engaged. And that's important to our democracy, so that it isn't just a small group of us discussing issues that are important. It's a broader conversation that involves the community. And that's what your show has helped to facilitate and to catalyze over the years, which is always great to be part of it for that reason.
And we've had other communities, I'll call them sister commissions, because every municipality, as MaryAnn well knows, has to have a commission exactly like ours. And we've had other sister commissions reach out and say, hey, we heard about whatever it was, fill in the blank, because we saw your episode, because they posted on YouTube, they posted all over the place, it's on Roku stations, and now it's like, okay, so you haven't just taped an episode now for the people of North Andover, you've taped an episode for people both inside your district and outside your district, literally Commonwealth-wide.
And beyond.
Yeah.
I was interested, I hadn't realized, Stacey, that you have so many outlets for this broadcast. It was really great to see, because it is accessible. There might be a pun there, but it is truly accessible in so many different ways. So it's convenient for people to be able to access and to be able to see. And as I mentioned at the outset, so many of the issues that are discussed on this show are issues for folks across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and across the country. So having that access is critical.
And one thing I will add is a couple of those guests we've had over the years
Have not been local.
Exactly. I mean, we've had
been able to,
situations where, you know, like if you remember during the legislative delegation show, State Representative Christina Minacucci couldn't come in person because she was concerned about exposure to COVID. So she was on the screen right over there. But we've had multiple guests from the Midwest, the West Coast, the greater Chicago area, where their nonprofit is physically located in that area. They still offer services to, at a minimum, folks in the Merrimack Valley, because we need to keep it as local as possible. And they've been able to come in remotely off of that television screen through like a Zoom type of a call, similar situation. And we've been able to bring them in from literally across the country. And now you've got maybe grandma and grandpa live in North Andover, and, you know, kid moved down to West Virginia, and, you know, grandkid has whatever's going on, and now they find out, oh, there's this national nonprofit that could help my grandkid down in where they're living, and they can take that episode and let their kid know about it. And, you know, so you've really been a part of truly giving some major exposure to the disability population as a whole.
Yeah, connecting people to services that they may not have known existed before. I think it's kind of, it goes both ways, because we have the show that is local, but because we are on so many different, like YouTube, which everybody sees, it does get a lot of airplay beyond our region. And then the fact that we can bring these other organizations in from other regions, it may be a great local appeal or beyond. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship in that respect, that we're able to reach so many people, but also connect with so many organizations out there that even we weren't aware of that could provide services for people.
And I've got to add to that, because North Andover CAM has been able to expand over the years. I mean, when we started with them, they were still in a very, very small studio at the high school. Probably, you could probably fit 3 of their studios at the time just in the studio here. But as they've branched out, because they've been able to, and rebroadcast on so many different areas, that then helps me when I'm talking, oh, hi, yeah, you're a nonprofit. What exactly do you do? Oh, let me introduce myself. My name's Phyllis. I chair the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance, and we produce this television program, and I go into it with them. And I actually now, whereas before it was, please, please, please come on our show. Now it's, well, I'm now booking into June. That's my last episode for this season. I'll get back to you when Stacey and I put our dates aside for the 25-26 season.
Yeah, the demand is there.
Yeah.
So the connectivity of what you're doing is amazing. It's incredibly powerful. But also the reach of what you're doing is very powerful, because you're going out there into the world with folks that have disability issues, physical challenges, a whole host of things, where that information can make a difference in their lives.
Yes.
And you're able to reach out to them and find them where they are, which is really a fantastic thing. And I have to wonder, when you started this back in the first episode, and we talked a little bit about the date, did you know that it would get this big? Did you know that it would grow this much? What were your thoughts back then for that first episode?
When I came out, because this was my brainchild.
Yep.
Poor Stacey.
Well, it came out of an event that didn't go so well.
Exactly.
And transformed into this wonderful TV show, because we had, I mean, you can tell the story.
I went to a CPAC event.
Yes.
Okay, and they brought in a nonprofit to talk about Asperger's, which, as we now know, has been folded into the autism spectrum disorder. But people with Asperger's, their families, are very angry about that, and this event was specifically targeted regarding Asperger's. And I sat there, and there were maybe 20 families there, and I thought, wow, this is a great idea. And I used to go to something called the Abilities Expo. They don't have that.
They don't have it anymore.
Boston anymore.
It's before COVID that kind of changed. I've seen some online activity, but I think the one we went to was 2018 or 17, where you had all of these areas, companies and nonprofits who provided different services or items for people who had disabilities. So it was a great way to connect.
Yeah, and Stacey and I keep saying we'll go to the big one in New York, and we just haven't had the time. But I met Miss Wheelchair Massachusetts there. And we brought her to the high school. No, it was the library.
It was the library.
We brought her to the library, and nobody showed up.
Yeah, we had an event, we posted, put out information.
Nobody showed up.
And
I mean, she was there. We had a very nice conversation with her, but that wasn't the point of the event.
Right.
And then Dick Valancourt was the person on the select board who we reported to at the time. And I brought him out for breakfast, and I said, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was after the commission said it was okay, but this is what I want to do. And he kind of looked at me like I had two heads, because it wasn't, people weren't using community access the way they should. And so it was like, well, you want to use it for something beyond just having meetings? Yeah, I kind of do. He went back to the select board, and they said, we'll give you 5 episodes. They haven't shut me down.
Yeah, and that was back in 2018,
18,
and here
yeah.
we are, 2025 still.
And we taped our very first episode on Americans with Disabilities Day.
Yep.
And there's a
So-
lesson there in how much impact you can have when you take that kind of initiative. Again, you started out very slowly with 5 episodes, but look at the impact that you've had. Some of it we can know about, and some of it we probably will never know
Right.
about. But it's been fantastic. And as you're describing this, I'm wondering, could there be an expo in the works for the North Andover Commission? Is that something that might have its genesis here in the 50th
chit-chatting
episode?
about.
Well, actually, I've mentioned that a couple of times to the select board, saying that we want to be able to do like a mini expo.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of hard work, and you know, they've had a lot on their plate, and I'm going to be going back again to them this year when it's time to report in and say, we still want to try to do this, because I think that it would be a tremendous resource.
There's value added, and when you see, because I've seen it with other communities where like maybe their senior center holds an expo or different, you know, it might be small, why shouldn't we be doing that as well? Because there is definitely a need for making
Yes.
that connection. And
Yes.
yes, there is a lot of work that would go into it, but I think it would be successful.
I do too,
Yeah.
and we go every year to, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Massachusetts Conference for Women.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
in December of every year.
So we've been going every year together for the past several years, and when you go, there are basically 2 hubs of where vendors are set up. One is where you've got nonprofits, and then one is shopping. for
And the
most part.
for-profits.
And for-profits. And usually we get there, we check in our coats, and we go, boom, straight to the nonprofit area. And over the years, the amount of guests that we've gotten from
Yeah.
being able to go to that has been,
It's an amazing networking
Yeah.
opportunity, but that's what we can bring to that kind of an expo. And even, I still have information going back to the Abilities Expo from several years ago,
Yeah.
because maybe there are local entities, nonprofits, that we can bring in, because again, you don't know what you don't know until you get that information. And that maybe that family that has somebody local, the grandchild or a relative with a disability, hey, this nonprofit may be able to help them, or this company may have, you know, something that can help them. So to me, again, there's that value added by getting that information, pulling it together, and
and we
getting
would
it
not
out
have been
there.
able to do it but for community access television.
Yeah,
Well, I actually think it's a logical next step to what you have done, right? So you've initiated a platform that now reaches a very broad audience.
Exactly.
You've had a tremendous number of guests and lots of folks who, in addition to those folks, want to be guests. You've provided a lot of information, and it's been largely one-way communication.
Yeah.
But the idea of an expo would be two-way communication, where you could bring people into the fold. I'm sure there are a lot of vendors and folks that supply services and
Yes,
supports
yes.
that would benefit from having folks be aware of what they do.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, there'd be a lot of folks that would benefit from knowing that those things are available. So I know it's a lot of work, but I think it would be very impactful.
I've been pushing it forward for what, 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
To be able to do it. Problem is logistics.
Yeah.
It's, where do you hold something like that? Well, I would think probably the high school gymnasium is probably the largest facility we have here in town. Then it's, okay, well, we want to do it on the weekend because working families, to give them the opportunity to go.
Getting the vendors and
Getting the vendors there.
nonprofits.
And the nonprofits, and then on top of it, security.
Yeah.
You know, working with the town, you know, to make sure that there's ample police and fire and
Yeah.
and EMT
accessibility.
accessibility and all
Because
of
that's what
that.
we're about.
And to incorporate also all the different kinds of disabilities that are out there.
Yeah.
You want to be able to target as many as possible.
Exactly.
honest,
And it
we
all
should-
takes money.
It takes money, and we should also use our cable access to tape and do a show around that as
Of
well, making sure
course.
we're in the field. So, but I do think that it is worth it. Like you said, it is the next logical step in bringing all of this together.
Well, and perhaps for something of this magnitude, it could be a collaborative effort with other similar commissions in the region,
Yeah.
so that it could have a unifying effect and a synergistic effect
Yeah.
to have everybody working together, so the workload would get spread out a little bit and you could have more participants. But I do understand it's a lot of work. There's no question
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're all in. I think
Yeah.
it's just, and we understand that the select board there have been so many things over the past 2 years to deal with. So it is something that we continue and will continue
To push for.
to push forward, and hopefully at some point it is something that can be worked out, and because we're all in to do this.
Yes.
Well, we'd be happy to help in any way that we
Thank you.
can.
Thank
We will
And-
take your help.
Yes.
And
Sure.
as with most things that we deal with in this realm, MaryAnn would be the point person. I'm sure that she would be happy to help, and
You bet.
we'd be happy to support the effort.
Thank
Oh,
you.
please, MaryAnn
Sure.
and Vicki
Yeah.
from your office and I, we're always in contact. You'd be scared how often we're in contact.
Maybe sometimes it's better that I don't know.
Exactly. But we brought you on not just to talk about, how beautiful it is that we've done 50 episodes, but to talk about what's going on Beacon Hill. You just started a brand-new legislative session. You needed to file all your bills. How many bills in total did you file?
So there's, first of all, when we reorganize this year, and our inauguration was on the first Wednesday of January,
Yeah.
which was actually on New Year's Day. And so
And the last night of Hanukkah.
There we go.
Yes, and there was an interesting coincidence there, because I was able to leave the State House on Inauguration Day in time to be here for the Hanukkah celebration and the lighting of the menorah
Yep.
on the Common, which was a wonderful event, very well attended. It's a great tradition in this community, and I was honored to be able to be a part of it once again with a number of my legislative colleagues. So it was great. But as we were doing that, after we were sworn in and after we finished with the menorah lighting on day 2, January 2nd, we began thinking about the bills that we have to file. And as you may recall, there's a deadline. It's usually mid-January when all of the bills have to be filed for the entire 2 years of the legislative session. Now, what that means is if a bill is filed in that time period, it must have a public hearing. It must have the first step in the legislative process. As you both know, but others may not know, we can also file bills after that deadline, but they have to be admitted by the House and the Senate. So the House and Senate have to take the affirmative action of taking a vote to admit them. Now, that most often happens, but if you file something in a timely way, you know it will get a public hearing. And so the sum total of that is that by the deadline, there were over 6,000 bills filed in the House and in the Senate. And that is about average for the last number of years. And of those 6,000 bills, I filed about 174. And so quite a fair number of bills reflecting all of the issues that we would like to address, reflecting the fact that there are 19 communities in our Senate district, and the fact that I have an additional role as the minority leader of the Senate to advance a policy agenda for the House, or the Senate rather, Republican caucus.
Right.
So taking all of those things together, we filed 174 bills, over 6,000 bills filed, which is another reason that your show is important, because it gives us a chance to talk about a select group of those bills that touch on the ability assistance issue and the ability assistance topic. And so it's important to also know that we do not yet have committees in the legislature, because those are a function of the joint rules. And we have not yet adopted joint rules. We have adopted Senate rules, but the House has not acted on its own rules or in a joint rules package. We anticipate that that will happen in the next several weeks. And as you both know, most of the committees in the legislature are joint committees. And so we have to have a set of rules that are agreed upon by the House and the Senate before those committees can be established and appointed. Now, one of the things that's been a bit disappointing to me over the last couple of sessions is we haven't been able to reach agreement with the House on a set of joint rules. And so we default, because we need to default to be able to keep going, to the rules from the prior legislative session. And we still try to work out a joint rules package, but we haven't been able to do that. This year I'm hopeful that we can. And I'm hopeful that we can because there has been signals from the presiding officers of both the House and the Senate that they are receptive to some change for transparency and accountability and efficiency in the legislative process. And we have been working toward that in my caucus for a number of sessions. The Senate has made some advances on those lines, but we think there's a window of opportunity this year for the House and the Senate to make strong gains. And so hopefully we'll be able to work that out with the House. When the House does act on its rules package, then we would presume there'll be a conference committee between the House and the Senate, 3 members of each branch, to try to work out a reconciliation between the House proposal for joint rules and the Senate proposal for joint rules. And we think that there's the opportunity for some very productive agreement on that front. So
That'd be fantastic.
we are very optimistic at this point in the process that we can get there.
That would be fantastic, because not everybody's a goofball like me when you have a day off and you're in session. I'm like, I wonder what's happening on Beacon Hill, and I go onto mass.gov and all of a sudden I flip it on. Senator Tarr's talking on the floor.
Well, and I'm pleased to tell you that we made some great strides in the Senate debate. I and my caucus put forward a number of proposed changes. The Temporary Rules Committee, which was chaired by Senator Joan Lovely from Salem, put forth a bipartisan set of recommendations. I served on that committee as well. And we did things like increase the amount of time that people have to read bills and read conference committee reports.
That's extremely important, because, I mean,
The number of bills.
I know
that-
both of us have, done on our own outside
Yep.
of what we do here. We can't call it lobbying, because lobbying has a specific legal term, but
Research.
yeah, but we've knocked on doors to talk to
Yes,
people
yeah.
about specific,
Yeah.
specific legislation. And, talking to your colleagues, whether it be in the Senate or in the House, you probably get like 5,000 bills across your
Yeah.
desk on any particular day, and
Yeah.
you don't know which ones, are something that you'd be interested in co-sponsoring or not. And it takes people to then be able to
Yeah.
know what's going on, to then knock on your door and say, hey, Bill 123, we think you might be interested. Would you be willing to sit down and talk to us, and alerting you to it so that you can then sign on to it?
So that's one of the things that I am most pleased with, is that when we afford more time for folks to read things that are coming before the legislature, it doesn't only help the members, it helps the public become more engaged.
Yes.
Because when you know what's happening and when you know what the substance of it is, you can connect with us and indicate your thoughts on those matters. So we did increase the time, again, for things to be read and things to be digested. We did increase the time for conference committee reports between the time when they are filed and the time when the legislature takes them up. I was hoping to get some additional time, but we moved in the right direction.
You can't
And
get
that's
everything you
important.
want.
And that's important. We also increased the amount of time for notice of public hearings, because the two of you and a lot of folks in the community that you represent, they want to be engaged as well.
Yes.
And if a public hearing doesn't give you enough notice, then it precludes the opportunity for that to happen. So again, this is in the category of, I think we made good progress. I would have liked to have gone further, but we did move forward. And that's why I'm hoping that we can reach a resolution with the House to make sure these things are able to move forward. A couple of specific amendments that I think you'd be interested in that I offered that were accepted. One was to require a 2/3 vote before a conference committee can go into executive session. So we all know that the power to go into executive session is significant. And when
Yes.
you do that, you are taking the discussion out of the public eye. And that responsibility and that power should come with responsibility. And
That's a
so-
huge responsibility.
Exactly. And so by changing the rule to require a 2/3 vote, we are confirming that this is a power that needs to be used judiciously and not arbitrarily. So that's an important amendment.
Yes.
Another one that was important deals with the state budget, the so-called General Appropriations Act, by which we spend money for everything in state government for the coming year. Up until now, in the Senate, when we take that up, there was a requirement that we would be allowed 5 days between when the budget is proposed by the Senate Ways and Means Committee and when the budget is taken up by the Senate.
That's not a lot of time.
I was able to move it to 7 days to give us an additional 2 days to do that. And similarly, I offered an amendment that governed when amendments can be filed. So the rule had been 48 hours to be able to offer amendments. I was able to amend it to change it to a minimum of 72 hours. So again, we're moving in the right direction in terms of more time, more accountability, more transparency. So hopefully, this will be a year when we can move forward on all of those things and adopt those rules for this session and set the precedent for sessions to come.
That's great.
No,
Yeah.
that is fantastic, because I can tell you, one of the things that the commission has started to do, because again, I'm a goofball,
No.
is we've started to, as best as we can, look and see what's going on Beacon Hill for legislation that we think that the town of North Andover might want to alert the delegation about, to say, listen, we think that this would be beneficial for the residents of North Andover, and this is why.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it gets also very difficult to follow legislation, because the moment it moves from one committee to another or an amendment is offered, unlike in the federal government where if it's filed as House 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's always going to be House 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until it, reaches joint committee with the Senate and yes, goofball. Every time it changes
Right.
in Massachusetts, so does the number. So you're playing mental hopscotch trying to figure out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
I would point out for your listeners that on your viewers, on our website, malegislature.gov,
Yep.
you can go to a bill and it will show you the tracking. So it
Yes.
helps you to
Yeah,
find it,
that
but
does
you have
help.
to know to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So we want to make sure that more people know that. And maybe that address can be something that gets displayed on the screen when the editing is done for this show. So malegislature.gov is where you can find some of that information. But you're right, it does, and it goes through a lot of twists and turns. And far from being a goofball, you are a catalyst. And the reason you're a catalyst, Phyllis, is that a lot of folks are busy in their lives and they don't have that amount of discretionary time to be able to follow this and to wade through it. But a lot of people would like to be involved. So when you help them to understand, here is the bill number, here is the issue, here is the change that's sought to be effected, it makes it so much easier for them to do that. It empowers them, and in turn it makes the legislative process better, because now we're hearing from a larger number of people who are interested in a subject. And that is the most powerful thing in our representative democracy, is to hear from the people we represent with informed, reasoned messaging about here's the way we would like things to go. And so you're helping that to happen.
In between working a full-time job,
Yep.
taking care of a kid with special needs, what else do I do?
Well, we know that in your household there's a hat rack that has a lot of arms on it
Yes.
for all the hats that you wear.
Yes.
There's no doubt about
And
that.
I get paid nothing for this job. I do it out of
No,
love. I do it
It's a
out of love.
volunteer job.
Exactly.
We do.
Well, I think like a lot of us in public life, a lot of the compensation comes in the form of satisfaction
And that
Yeah.
really
from
is.
knowing that you're helping folks.
And
Yeah.
that really is, what it is with this show
Yep.
for me personally is,
Yeah.
the satisfaction of knowing, wow, 50 episodes, look at that list of guests. How many lives have we touched?
Yeah.
I'll give you a very quick story. I think you already know, I graduated from American University with my degree in poli-sci down in DC. My senior year, there's always a lot of food waste going on, but there was a significant amount of hunger issues going on in DC, more so than normal. It made the news a little bit more. And I was sitting down in the food hall. It was just as breakfast was ending and they were prepping for lunch, and they had these huge vats of scrambled eggs. They were just tossing them. And I was like, well, why aren't you just reserving them tomorrow? Like, well, if you want, you can take a Tupperware and bring it back to your dorm. And I'm like, no, that's not the point. The point is you're throwing out how many dollars worth,
Right.
Worth of eggs. And they're like, well, we're not allowed to reserve them because of the contract that, it was Marriott Food Services at the time, that had with American University. And even without the internet, this was back in the days, when when the dinosaurs roamed, before you could do research on the internet. Even without the internet, I found a nonprofit that actually had just started up. There was a new law that went into effect in DC that, basically if you gave the food you didn't think there was anything wrong with it and somebody got sick, you were still safe.
Right.
So this nonprofit, it was called DC Central Kitchen, and they would go around with properly sterilized trucks that are refrigerated, properly sterilized containers, and then, in this case it would have been Marriott Food Services or American University, could then put those eggs into this food container, keep it cold, and then it would be picked up by DC Central Kitchen and distributed around DC, whether it be halfway houses or, food storage areas or wherever.
Right.
And took a little work, and I introduced DC Central Kitchen to American University and to Marriott, and I said, okay, you talk. And a couple of weeks later, they came back, and they said, we're going to participate with DC Central Kitchen. So I graduate in '93, and the program's still going on while I'm there. And a friend of mine who is very big into politics as well, he used to run a nonprofit here in town, a political nonprofit, Boston. And he graduated about 5 to 10 years later from a master's degree program at AU. And he's like, what's the one thing you're proudest of? And you can't say your family and your education and your kids. And before I could say anything, my husband's in the other room, he goes, DC Central Kitchen. And this gentleman goes, what's DC Central Kitchen? I said, oh, it's probably done with by the time you got there. And I explained to him what I just, that was you? Program ran for 10 years before Marriott lost their contract with AU.
So, yeah. But it shows the effect.
Fact.
The domino.
Of me just getting
So,
annoyed that
yeah.
somebody was throwing eggs out.
Yeah. But I think for both of us this was your brainchild, but for both of us, being on the commission and doing this work is personal because of the deficits or the lack of services or things that we've seen.
And you see
In
it
our-
from your sister, I see it
I have
from
a
my
younger
son.
sister who is developmentally disabled and has a coexisting mental illness, and I'm her legal guardian. And I know, because we're from a certain generation, when my sister was born, my mother was told flat out, because after her diagnosis, she was told by, honestly, a well-meaning doctor, put her away and get on with your life, institutionalize her.
It was
Because
the
that was
time.
the time.
Yeah.
It was the late 60s. And my mother, to her credit, said, no, I love my daughter. I'm going to try to give her the best life. And for that, I grew up. This has been a lifelong journey, watching and making sure that she has the best life she can with whatever services she can get. And it's been quite a process. It's like, well, it's not just us. We want to make sure that for other people, because you never know what somebody's going through, what their family's going through. And disability comes in all shapes, sizes, forms, you name it. And at some point, all of us will deal with it in some capacity, whether it's a family member, friend, or ourselves.
I have epilepsy.
Yeah.
You
I mean,
wouldn't necessarily know it unless I told you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the important message, and it's been the message of this show,
Yeah.
is that these issues touch everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if for no other reason, they touch everyone because we're all neighbors and we're all members of the same community.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that we work together to address those issues. And what you're doing helps people do that. And I would make the same claim about MaryAnn, who works in our office as a liaison to the disability community. And I will tell you that she works far more hours than she's compensated for.
Trust me, I know that. The times I've gotten phone calls.
Sorry.
No, I'm thrilled
No,
to talk to you. It's just,
But I'm going to guess that if we ask MaryAnn, which we will in 10 seconds,
Yep.
that she would tell us that part of what motivates her is the satisfaction that she gets in addition to being a great public servant for helping folks in their time of need.
Yeah.
And actually, it's very true, and we don't know what other people are going through. I mean, we all have our own disabilities, and we learn to live with them, but we don't know how other people, where can they reach out to? How can they reach out? What is available? And there are so many organizations, nonprofits, or even anywhere that they can call me, for example, and I can totally reach out.
I mean, and our office being my desk at home and your office.
Oh, true, yes.
I received a call from Melissa, the town manager, or no, it was an email, about a week and a half ago at this point, saying that a resident was having some issues and could I please reach out to him? And I reached out to him and I was talking to him for about a half hour and I said, okay, these are the people you need to talk to. And I connected him with MaryAnn, and I also connected him with Christina Minicucci, who does the Mini Miva
Yeah.
for transportation purposes. So he got me, I got,
And he's actually in very good hands right now.
I'm
I'll
sure
let you
he
know
is.
that, yes, yeah.
I am sure he is. I do not question that one.
And I think I called you up on that to
Yes, you
confirm.
did.
Yeah.
I think that was an 8 o'clock call.
And I think that's what's important about a team effort.
Yes.
Is that it is so much more powerful than trying to do things in isolation.
Yes.
And that's true of the way that we interact with your office and your commission. It's also true of the way the North Andover legislative delegation works together.
Yes.
4 legislators, different parties, representing different parts of the community.
Very
but
distinct
all,
districts.
Yes, but all with the same objective. And I like to think that we have a particularly good partnership between each other
Yes.
as a legislative delegation, and our partnership with the community is very strong, particularly in our interactions with the town administrator and with the select board, and also with municipal agencies like yours.
No, it's great. And moving over a little bit, rather than tooting our own horns, you came and gave us some information about some legislation.
Well, we do have just a few that we wanted to spotlight for you.
No, and I think this is great. We're
that
gonna.
we think would be of interest. Now, it's important for me to let you know that these bills that I'm going to reference, we're going to give you a docket number. And the reason for that is because, again, we do not have committees, so these bills haven't been referred, in which case they would get a bill number.
Yep.
So right now, they have a docket number.
SD, this
Yes,
docket.
Senate docket.
Okay.
And that can be traced, again, on malegislature.gov. And if you follow it, eventually they'll have bill numbers, and eventually they'll have a public hearing. And at those public hearings, the rules require that we have the ability for folks to participate remotely, so you don't have to come into the city anymore. We certainly would love to see you. But if you can't do that, you can participate remotely, and the committees also take written testimony. So you can communicate with us in lots of different ways. And I'll run through these quickly because I know we do have a finite amount of time for the show, because I think there's a celebration that's about to
Yes,
ensue
yes.
relative to the 50th episode, and we don't want to take any time away from that. But I'll go through a couple of these quickly.
Please,
Thank
yes.
you.
So Senate Docket 878 has to do with folks, older adults and people with disabilities that happen to be in a nursing home. Now, if that same group of people is in a developmental disability facility or developmental development facility or in a mental health facility, they have a specific set of rights which make sure that they are able to be protected and get what they need. That is not true of folks that are in a nursing home. So what this bill seeks to do is align those protections so that they're true in all of those settings, and it would require the Department of Public Health to issue regulations by July 1st of 2027 to make sure that the rights of folks that are older or who have disabilities are recognized as a standard practice. Not to say that they aren't recognized,
Right.
but it would standardize and codify them for folks in a nursing home.
And that's important because I don't think a lot of people realize, oh, well, they had these rights when they were perhaps maybe in a group home, but
Yeah.
now I've had to move them over to a nursing
Right.
home. And might the same things be there? Yes, just as a matter of standard of care.
Right.
But to now know you have a law that says it has to be done.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because the goal here is we want to make sure that everyone's rights are properly
Yes.
acknowledged
Yes.
and properly protected. And so that's Senate Docket 878. The title of the bill is an act protecting the rights of older adults and people with disabilities. And I should point out, this is one of a couple of bills that came to us through an organization in Massachusetts known as the Dignity Alliance.
I've heard of
Yes.
them.
They are working on a very full legislative agenda, and so they presented us with a couple of these that we
great.
sponsored, also other bills that we co-sponsored. So along those same lines, Senate Docket 169 deals with the oftentimes very complex and sometimes very difficult situation. The title of the bill is an act relative to family visitation with a vulnerable adult. And this deals with someone who may be in a healthcare institution of some sort, and they could be older, sometimes not older, but they have limited capacity, and visitation is blocked by a family member to someone, either another family member or someone else that may want to have a visitation. And this bill, it deals particularly with frail elderly individuals, and it defines terms like who is a family caregiver, who is a family member, and to clarify who might want access that they feel is being unreasonably blocked. And the bill makes provision for the individual that someone's seeking to visit to express outright opposition. Obviously, they can control
Right.
that,
Yeah.
but in the event where that isn't possible, it sets up a process where someone can petition for visitation so that they can visit their loved one, notwithstanding the fact that someone may be unreasonably trying to block that access.
Now, let me ask you from a legal point of view, because you're talking guardian, so you're talking family court, that's the court system.
Yep.
Okay, in order to, let's assume this goes through as it's written, would somebody be going through the judicial system or through an administrative system in order to be able to deal with that?
That is a great question, and it largely envisions the judicial system, and an important aspect of the bill is the appointment of a guardian ad litem. So I mentioned that the person to whom visitation is being sought
Yep,
may not have the capacity to either express their views or be properly represented in the system on their own, so a guardian ad litem would be appointed so that that person's, all of their rights would be protected.
in addition to whatever guardianship they might already have.
Exactly, yes.
That's fantastic.
So another issue that we're trying to address is the situation with what happens if there's an emergency. So we all saw what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, which was really a prolonged emergency,
Yes.
but we've seen other situations, natural disasters, and we've seen a lot of flooding. We've seen most recently some earthquakes, fortunately that haven't resulted in a tremendous amount of disruption, but they have occurred.
Yes.
We've seen wildfires on the West Coast. So what this bill, it's Senate Docket 183, and its title is an act to improve resilience in older adults and people with disabilities during public health, environmental, or technological emergencies. And what it does is require councils on aging and local housing authorities to develop an inventory of services and support needs of older adults and people with disabilities in the event that there's a disaster. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about that before the disaster occurs. And those
Yeah,
points of
those-
contact make a lot of sense, the councils on aging and our housing authorities. And this bill would require the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Environmental Affairs to direct health, public safety, and emergency management professionals who provide for the care of these folks to take into account some of their resilience factors. So when we're putting this plan together, we want to think about the needs of the folks that we're trying to serve. So we take the folks that provide care or emergency response, and we look at factors, demographic, physical, psychological, spiritual, and sociocultural factors, so that these plans that would get developed would be ready in the event that there is an emergency.
And what I like about it is public health, environmental, technological.
Mm-hmm.
We can't really live without technology
Yeah.
these days.
Well, we
So what
can't.
happens?
And we've seen, unfortunately, in the last few years, what happens when there is a technological disruption.
Yeah.
AT&T goes down for 2 hours and
Yeah.
everybody,
Freaks out,
yeah.
for lack of a
No,
better.
no, but, you know,
Yeah,
or
it's a reality,
or
but also.
Gmail goes down, sort of a thing.
But also, how is that connected to somebody who may have a disability, a communication system, or a health processing system?
A health
that,
monitor.
Yeah, it's, or we lose electricity. I mean, I think about the microbursts that happened about a year and a half ago
Yes.
here in North Andover, and what it was like not only not having electricity, not having cable or internet. What would that be like for somebody who has a disability or somebody in a nursing home, however that works?
If they don't already
Being-
have somebody to just
Right.
pick up the ball and
Yeah.
run
So
with
having
it.
that kind of plan, it's almost like, what are those COOP plans that I know we have at work? What are the contingency plans if something happens?
Yes.
So having that specifically for somebody with a disability or an elder person who may be incapacitated, what are the next steps? And cross different agencies, I think this is probably something that a lot of us haven't thought of, maybe we've taken for granted, but it's critical.
In schools, they do have
Yeah,
Mhm.
emergency.
yeah, the
plans.
protocols.
Yeah.
Yes, and for particularly separate ones for disabled
Yeah.
Mhm.
students. So-
And
So
you know
this
what I-
makes sense.
Yeah, and you know what, and we've all said it, you never know what's missing until you absolutely need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
till something happens.
Well, it's true, and I do want to point out that our emergency management professionals do spend a lot of time
Yes.
planning. They do a
Right.
terrific job. We've seen that in North Andover. We saw it when we had the emergency with the gas explosions.
Yep.
We saw it with the microburst. So they do a great job.
Yeah.
The intent of this is just to make sure that everyone in the population is accounted for in that
Exactly.
planning. And again, taking into account their special needs and special factors that the
Right.
bill outlined is important.
Yep.
And so that's an important one. Again, that is Senate docket 159.
Now, I'm looking at this just to demographic, physical, psychological, spiritual, and sociocultural language,
You know,
foreign language barriers.
that may be a good addition to spell out, but again, you may consider that to be included in some of these other sort of
That's why I'm
sociocultural factors. So,
asking, yeah.
but again, a lot of good things happen on this show, and a lot of ideas get their genesis on this show, and that may be a good suggestion for an amendment to make sure that we include language, and it's a point well taken.
Thank
The,
you.
the other thing that we wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that we are in the midst of the planning for the state budget. And so the
Yes.
governor filed her budget proposal, and now it's up to the House and the Senate to work on our plans. And very soon, the House and the Senate Ways and Means Committees will go out and hold public hearings across the state. And then in April, the House will debate the state budget, and in May, the Senate will debate the state budget. And there are a number of challenges. Number one, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty at what might happen with regard to the federal government. And the example that I use that I think is the best example is that the Medicaid budget
Yes.
is approximately 36% of the state budget. And Medicaid reimburses us in the Commonwealth
Right.
for between 40 and 60% of those expenses. So even a minor disruption in federal funding would have a tremendous effect on the state
Yeah.
budget.
And you're just talking about Medicaid. A lot of people don't realize unemployment insurance.
Absolutely.
Employers do pay into it, no
Yes.
question about it.
Right.
But how much of that funding actually comes from the federal government? Because then the Department of Unemployment Assistance has to work by the rules doled out by the federal Department of
Yes.
Labor.
Yeah, and we just saw that issue come up with the reconciliation of an error that was made. Of
During the
the
PUA,
misuse
yeah.
of funding. And now that has a significant impact on the employers particularly, who are going to have to pay for that,
Yep.
the cost of that
Yes.
remedy that was agreed upon. But my point is that if you have something major, like the Medicaid account, and it gets disrupted, that has the potential to affect every other thing in the state budget, because it's such a significant amount of the state budget. So we are concerned about that. Now, a couple of notable things, and they're mentioned on the sheet that I gave to you, is that there are some increases in this budget, but there are some concerning things as well. So one of the things that is important is that for the Department of Developmental Services, there is an increase of about $82 or $83 million over the current fiscal year. But what's concerning is that that budget also proposes to cut the number of managers for mental health by roughly 50%. And those case managers are critical.
Yep.
And they're already at capacity, if not beyond.
Yeah, and so
the
we're
caseloads are huge.
So we're very, very concerned about that and trying to reconcile an increase in the overall line item for the agency with a decrease in the number of care managers. So we are concerned about that. And as with many of the programs, and I just realized I juxtaposed something. So with developmental services, there's an increase. Mental health, we're still looking at that.
DMH,
And
so
we're concerned about,
departmental.
because that's where the
Okay.
care managers
Yeah.
would be cut, and I want to be clear about
Yeah.
that. So in addition to that, we know that one of the things that's important is the workforce, and I included something here in the document about this because the workforce that provides direct care is very important.
Yes.
And oftentimes we will use tools like a reserve account to help increase the wages of those direct care providers, and we anticipate that will be part of the budget discussion again in the coming year. And then in addition to that, one of the things that we've talked a lot about on this show in the past is the cost of special education.
Yes.
And we are continuing to hear from local school districts all across the state about how much of a burden that cost is. Now, we would all agree, and any reasonable person would agree, we have to provide those services.
Yes.
They are
Yeah.
essential. So cutting them is not an option. But what we do need to figure out is the best way to deliver them.
Yeah.
And so once again, I've proposed legislation, and we can give you the information about that for later, but I've proposed legislation to do a top-to-bottom study of the way that we deliver special education in Massachusetts. Number one, to make sure that it's delivered in the most effective way for the kids that need it, and number two, to make sure it's delivered in the most cost-effective ways for the entities that have to pay for it, including local school
What
districts.
about uniformity? Because
Yeah,
we're very fortunate here in North Andover. My son has special needs, and he is sent out of district
Yeah.
because we've tried everything,
yes,
with his IEP, and he is sent out of district. But if we were living in another community,
What would that look like?
what would that have
Yeah.
looked like?
yeah.
Are not whether or not would they have had better services than North Andover, as much as would they have at least had the same amount of services? Would they have had the same tools at their disposal in order to be able to attempt
Yeah.
to provide my son with services, or anybody else's child with
Sure. Yeah.
services?
And as we know, and you made reference to this again a little while ago in this show, is that a lot of these services are delivered through IEPs and 504 plans, things that are very individualized.
Yes.
And so as those things progress, we need to make sure that what is promised in those plans is delivered in the most cost-effective way. And so I've been pursuing this for a number of years. You know that.
Yes, I do.
I think it is critical, as critical now as it has ever been.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
even more critical now, post-COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
than it
Yeah.
was beforehand. Not
Yeah.
that it wasn't, but even more so.
Yeah, and
'cause-
that's also, we're seeing that the DMH cuts, potential cuts, is concerning
Sure.
as well.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of rolled in together in some respect, that, you're cutting services when all of this has happened, and you're
Yeah.
seeing the increase in mental health issues for not just younger people, it goes across the
Yeah.
board, but you are definitely seeing it in those who had to be, online, may have missed out on those important social
The
interactions.
Gen
and
Z,
now-
the Gen Z is
yeah,
a big one.
it's, we have a generation of people who really need those supports, because DMH isn't just adults, it's children as well, and then looking at special ed, all of those pieces really
Sure.
need to be looked at.
And I think an important thing to remember is that the state budget that's been proposed, and we've only seen one proposal from
Yeah.
the governor, increases spending by about 7.4%. That's a very significant
Yes,
number.
that
Yes.
is-
And so there is room here to realign the priorities so that the spending matches the priorities. And again, that's why this show is important.
Yep.
That's why outreach is important. And as the legislative process unfolds around the development of the budget, we look forward to sharing information with you so that you can share it to the community and beyond about what's happening, when it's happening, and how you can get involved.
And
You
we
know,
appreciate
you're going to
that.
laugh, but my therapist works for DMH, and she does therapy as a side hustle. Is that the best way to put it?
Yes.
And so, do we discuss my personal issues? Yes. But, you know, we will talk about what I'm doing with the commission. And one of the talking points you put on this paper is plans to close the Pocasset Mental Health Center down on the Cape.
Yeah.
And she works down on the Cape, and she's like, if you ever get a chance to talk to anybody, can you let them know we need those 15 beds? We're already, you know, 25 short. We need, and people don't realize, you
The
know,
Cape
especially
is- Yeah, that's a whole different community
you get out,
right there.
you get out to Western Mass, you
Yeah.
get down to the Cape, you know, we feel like we're in a microcosm here
Yeah.
inside the 495 belt.
Yeah.
And it's a very different feel than when you talk to other parts of the
Yeah.
Commonwealth.
The Cape seems to be, because, I mean, with where I work, I know I've heard it, because we do have mass ability offices throughout the state, including the Cape. So I have heard that kind of feedback where there's a lack down there to begin with. So to have something else potentially be closed is potentially devastating
Yeah.
if, you know, that happens. And then to your point about the western part of the state, we've had that same, because you're dealing with more rural areas. I mean, I'm sure I don't have to explain it, but it's like, yeah, you have these more populated areas, but what about the rest of the state? It's not just Boston and Worcester, you know, there are other places as well. So, you know, being able to address this is really important.
So I would suggest that we continue to face a serious problem across the state
Yes.
with regard to mental health beds.
Yes.
And so, you know, having access to timely treatment and
Yep.
timely admission into a bed is critical. And so this, the situation on Cape Cod is symptomatic of the problem that we face, but reducing those beds for that geographically isolated area will exacerbate the
Yeah,
problem
Exactly.
It'll be
in-
catastrophic.
to a
Yeah,
tremendous
it's
extent.
devastating.
So we are concerned about that.
No,
That would
And
be
we-
catastrophic.
yeah.
Reducing beds anywhere is catastrophic, as, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times I've had to worry about getting a bed for my son
Yeah.
because he's been
Yeah.
in and out. And then what ends up happening is they churn the people out like butter, you know, oh, we get them in here today and 3 days later they're stabilized, let's send them home, and then they're back in the system again, and it's this horrific.
It's a revolving door.
Yeah,
And the
round
thing
robin.
is, people are released and they're not stable. They're really not. Maybe for the
And-
moment they, you know, it's,
And
it
the money
is.
isn't there, and cutting the money
yeah, makes it worse.
makes it worse.
Well, and that raises another topic, Stacey, that's very important to me, is proper discharge planning, so that we make sure that after someone has been in a facility,
Yep.
that when they leave, there's a plan for
Yeah.
what happens next, so that they don't relapse, they don't have to be readmitted, which is good for cost containment and good for their quality of life.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, a lot of times, at least I can tell you from what I've seen with my son, it's, okay, follow up with your pediatrician,
Yeah.
follow up with your prescriber, make sure, you know, you have these coping skills type of a thing. And that's all nice,
Yeah.
well and true, but that's not a plan. That doesn't, you know, that doesn't help the average person really put the pieces
Right.
together. You're gonna tell me to follow up with a pediatrician.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I know that, and maybe somebody else doesn't, but what does that mean?
Right.
Follow up with the pediatrician.
So-
Pediatrician is a general medical doctor.
Right.
Pediatrician is not a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Yeah.
So I
No,
think
agreed.
that will be very important. And so I think both of us are really happy to hear that
Yes.
that's front and center. And unfortunately,
We've
because
run
we've been
it.
getting the
The wrap it up.
Yeah. So we do have to, we could go on all night,
Yes.
but
We've
this
actually
is-
had one of these episodes go, I think, an
Yeah.
hour and 35 minutes.
Well, you know,
but all important information.
no doubt about it, and we've covered a lot of ground, but I think that's appropriate for the 50th show. And again, I want to end where we began, and by saying thank you to the two of you. Thank you to everyone here at North Andover Public Access Television. This has been an incredible adventure. It's been an incredible project, and it's continuing to grow, expand, continuing to have greater impact with every show. And I do want to say thank you to one of our guest technicians here today, Tobin Abraham.
Yes.
From
He got
Representative
roped
Traub
into it.
Nguyen's
He
office.
roped into it. He's
He
done a great
unwittingly
job.
came into the lobby and is now not only behind a camera,
He's been the floor
but is
manager,
floor
too.
directing
Yes.
this show. And so that speaks to the adaptability and the flexibility of this show, which is so emblematic
We
of
give
the
everybody a
of the
chance.
get it done attitude. And so special thanks to Tobin for being here
Yes.
for the 50th show.
We do appreciate it.
We do appreciate
So,
it.
And Bruce, thank you so much.
Yes.
Both of you for
Thank you
being.
for having us.
We'll
Yes.
definitely see you this time next year
Yes.
on the
Of
show.
course, February is your month.
Exactly.
So file bills in January, talk about them in
them in
February.
Why do you think we do it that way?
So thank you both again
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
You can reach Senator Tarr's office at 617-722-1600 or email him at bruce.tarr, that's Tarr, at masenate.gov.
Thank you to our crew this month. We have Stuart Pesco, who is on our commission helping out, and Tobin Abraham, who is with Trumwin's office. So thank you. And then, of course, Bill Robert, who is part of our cable access TV station.
We have been privileged to have the following guests. Some, like Senator Tarr, have joined us on multiple occasions since our first episode in July 2018. Former Town Clerk Joyce Bradshaw, North Andover CPAC, Paralyzed Veterans of America, Triangle, the North Andover Police Department talking about the E911 system, Class Inc., Congressman Seth Moulton's office, the Massachusetts Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation. Stacey over here was discussing transition planning at one point. The Special Ed Department at Greater Lawrence Technical School, the Professional Center for Child Development. We had a special episode. Our guests were talking about how they were living with FSHD. Town Manager Melissa Rodriguez, and North Andover Youth Center. Built, North Andover CAM. My personal favorite was that legislative roundtable we had with then State Senator Diana DeZoglio, State Senator Bruce Tarr, State Representative Tron Nguyen, and former State Representative Christina Minicucci.
We also had Adaptive Sports New England, the North Andover Police Department, Community Support Office, North Andover Veterans Officer Joseph LeBlanc, Perkins Career Launch, Perkins School for the Blind, 4 Paws for Ability, NILP, Northeast Independent Living, also Ironstone Farms, Bridgewell, American Training, the Disability Law Center for Massachusetts, of course, Senator Bruce Tarr, and the Federation for Children with Special Needs, Women's Money Matters, State Representative Tram Nguyen, Mini MEVA, Maternal Mental Health, Leadership Alliance, Essex County District Attorney Paul Tucker, Waystone, the Institute for Human-Centered Design. We also had State Representative Adrienne Ramos, North Andover Police again, this time talking about scam issues, especially targeting the elderly and those with disabilities. Select Board Member David Kress, Don Warren, Clerk, the Flutie Foundation, Abilities Dance Boston, and Jeff Coco, for emergency services for North Andover.
In March, we will be joined by our new Governor's Council member, Eunice Ziegler. Our friends from the Federation for Children with Special Needs will be back to discuss their new respite care program. And due to scheduling conflicts, we're working to reschedule our episode with State Auditor and our friend Diana DiZoglio. In May, we will be joined by State Representative Adrian Ramos. And that said, we're constantly looking for new topics to explore here at Ability Assistance. We would truly love to know what topics you would want to hear more information about. If there are specific topics that you would like to learn more about, please email me directly at pjones, that's P-J-O-N-E-S, at northandoverma.gov, or call me, it goes straight to my cell phone, 978-494-0136. In addition to watching through your cable station, you can catch all of our programs on demand via the YouTube channels, the Cablecast app through Roku and Apple TV. You can also find the Cablecast app through your phones and tablets app stores, the Town of North Andover's Facebook page, the North Andover CAM website. Podcast is on Podbean. Oh, and we also post it as well on the Commission's Facebook page.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere.